Can you hear me? Yes, good. Well, hello everyone. Nice to be back. I won't be here for the next few weeks. Yeah. That actually brings up the question, have I been here the last few weeks? Well, let's, again, if there's anyone new, I'm just going to put out how I see it. That's a weird way of saying it. So non-duality, again, is a negation of duality. So duality is act, react, push, pull. It has a certain swing, sort of like two sides of a coin. No matter how many times you cut the coin, there's going to be two sides. So this, it's a sense of how the mind is interpreting this event, or this eventing, so to speak. And the center of it is this feeling of dualism between, sometimes we feel like we're the thinker, sometimes we feel like we're the thought about. So sometimes we're cast as an object, sometimes we're cast as a subject. Both of those are negated by non-duality. Now, some people would say maybe the subject is a pale reflection of subjectivity, but everything is in a way. But it's a negation of this too. So it's a negation of I've left and I have to get back and stuff like that. It's just a negation of all these movements. The mental state sort of rocks itself into a sleep. Yeah, it goes this way, that way, this way. It's a negation of that. So what does negation mean? It's not denial. Denial is a mental product. Denial isn't what negation implies. Negation is seeing things from a fact and recognizing the assumption of a lot of previous facts. Yeah. So the fact of non-duality gives us the eyes to see a lot of assumed facts and bring them into stark contrast, so that the understanding of non-duality is really about the misunderstanding that we live as and live from. And so when those misunderstandings are questioned, not by that which is misunderstood or misunderstanding at the moment, but from the assumption being ourselves reality. And that's basically the assumption. It's not the idea of there's a recognition of the thief and now you become the policeman. That's not it. It's a recognition from what we are. And what we are, as Ramana would imply, is being ourselves reality. So the seeker is the sought. What's looking is what we're looking for. This is the fact that here is brought to us by an assumption, where the assumption is we are what we're looking for. That basically is the thread that runs through all and everything else said in non-duality. Really, we are what we're looking for, being ourselves reality. Being ourselves reality, we're going to question what we take to be reality. And not so much the things we see, but the seer of things, yeah? That's what's going to come into question. Not the seeing of things or the things we see, but the seer of things, the feeler of feelings, the thinker of thoughts, the doer of actions. And see what happens, yeah, basically. If it clicks, if the spiritual shoe fits, you'll wear them, and then basically you won't be in the market for spiritual hiking boots or fucking mountaineer boots, because you're going to have to climb to the apex of transcendence. You're basically going to sort of be, slippers, basically. Yeah, you're going to chill out, and your pursuit of happiness will look like a leisurely walk, because you realize yeah, you just realize that that which is pursuing happiness is the source of unhappiness in a way. So you basically just see things in a new light. That new light isn't something that just finally shows up. It's always been here. This is one of the big impacts I had one time when the whole storyline was intervened and paused. I had a sense of being ourselves reality, and it basically told me it's always been that way. So nothing that I thought ever happened, nothing that I think will happen, and nothing that I'm feeling is happening now has ever happened, in a sense, yeah? So that was pretty good news, really. So that which I'm looking from is always happening at all times. Right where I am, no matter what condition I think I'm in that prior condition. And that prior condition has the ability, it may not be accessed right now, but it has the ability to outshine circumstances and situations, yes? So how does that express? On a large survey of it, it would be traveling lighter, really, basically. So you don't get a get out of jail free card. Maybe you'll realize you're not in jail, but you won't get out of jail a free card. Yet you'll notice that over time, you notice that you've been traveling lighter through a lot of stuff that you used to travel very heavy through. So something has changed, and it hasn't been the stuff. So it must have been where you are, yeah? And so, yeah. So just see, like Ramana Maharshi, if you've heard of him. I never heard it from the words, the horse's mouth, but he basically spent a lot of time in silence, and he thought that would be enough, but no one was seemingly getting it. So he brought about the idea that it's actually in the Vedas, the oldest scriptures, of self-inquiry. And he basically put it that that's the only possibility you can do here is to inquire of the doer. Basically, that's it. Yeah. So everything else that you may do without you knowing it may be reinforcing that which you're not in the pursuit of that which you are. That pursuit may be reinforcing that which you're not. That was the assumption he put out. And he basically said, on one level, surrender, and on the other level, self-inquiry. So the one level is the action figure admits that it's outmatched. It recognizes the futility of relying on what's not reliable, and there's a seeing the emperor without any clothes on, and then surrender is a pretty damn good reaction. And surrender would be that, hey, I can't do it, so something else will. Thy will be done, and usually you find out thy will is done. Yeah? Now, on another level of the self-inquiry, the surrender, the idea of surrender would be to who is there to surrender and to whom. So there would be no point of surrender on that level. But if you seem to be appearing on another level, trying to adapt to who is it that's going to surrender to whom is probably not going to help your day today. Surrender would probably produce more effects where you want them to be, seemingly, like how you're traveling now. So, yeah. So non-duality, in a sense, starts from a fact and then questions the assumed facts, yeah? Starts from being ourselves reality and then questioning what's reality seem to be up to. Yeah, what is reality doing right now to fool itself so that it's at the greatest mystery, as Ramana said, reality wanting to attain reality. I mean, something must be going on to sort of cause that appearance to show up, that reality, being ourselves reality, wanting to attain reality. Yeah, so let's see what's going on, not who it's going on for or who's doing it, but just to see what's going on, hopefully from what you are. And then The horse will be in front of the cart. Things will make sense. Blue will be blue. Red will be red. Yeah. And you may find some peace. Yeah. You may be able to enjoy peace of mind. Yeah. Because time won't be the dominant influence anymore. Using what you are to find what you are won't be the basic programming that's going on. You'll come, for me, it was the last answer, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I heard these ideas, I entertained them, or there was an entertaining of them. Forgive me for the language, it's difficult. I'm not into, we've got to make a whole new non-duality language. I hope you get the message. Don't disqualify me because I say I or me. To me, that's like non-dual Pharisees. They know the letter of the law, but they don't have the spirit of the law. So that's where use the language loosely, and hopefully you get the message. So if we are reality, then we can see from reality, yes? If we are reality, we can't look for reality, yes? So that's basically the discerning ruler you use. Being ourselves reality, it negates the idea of looking for reality, obviously. Based on being ourselves reality. Now, you don't have to agree or disagree. This isn't like the war of light and darkness, and you're getting conscripted into non-duality, which would be you wouldn't be doing anything. You wouldn't be anywhere near the front lines. Don't worry. It's a pretty cushy position, but but it's being out, you're onto something because this is factual. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. And it can bring about something that no other answer ever brought about, which was it became the last answer, and it totally negated any need for any other answers concerning this topic of what am I, what's the meaning of all this. It was pretty sweeping. And there was a huge loss of interest in shit I had no business trying to be interested in. It's above my pay scale. I can't, why would I want to keep listening to descriptions of the indescribable? I mean, I'd rather be a description as like an art project of the indescribable instead of listening to descriptions. I would, and I feel that's what we are. We're a description of the indescribable. Yeah, that's it. So why would I want to understand what can't be comprehended? It makes no sense. So why not? All right. So negation turns that desire, let's say, that urge to know something you can't know, to know something that you can know, really. You can see what you're not. It's in plain sight. It's the sight of awareness. I'm not talking about vision. It's in plain sight. You watch it all day, but you call it you. Yeah, that's the dilemma. There's an identification as a system that's broadcasting. Yeah, and that identification acts as huge blindness to the basic facts that yes, there's seeing, but there's no seer. Yes, there's doing, but there's no doer. People believe when they hear there's no doer, they believe there's no doing. No, there's tons of doing and there's never been a doer. Yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah, it's not like you enter non-duality and you suddenly arrive at, I'm not the doer. There's never been a doer. There's just doing. There's just thinking, feeling, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, doing all this stuff. Yeah, it goes on and on and on. And we're really an interpretation, a mental one that tries to keep up with it and actually keeps up with it by saying it's before it all. Yeah, I'm like, I have a lot to do with a lot of shit I have nothing to do with. It's insane. So, this was very relieving of me because I really, I was banking on the possibility of transcending this place. And, that was keeping me blind to the facts. So I had to have a rude awakening, yeah, of the the fruitlessness and the futility of trying to use what I am, quote unquote, as what I'm not, to find what I am. Yeah. So that became the last answer, because it's really before all answers. So I would say that which is not an answer nor a question would be the last answer. And yeah, here we are, chatting away about it. I went to Satsangs. I heard what I needed to hear, I guess, but I don't remember people emphasizing the selfing, and something wanted to come through me and do that. Yeah, it was just that clear, and it told me there's no point of moving from this. There's no point from moving from this point, because if you don't see it, you're looking from it for all intents and purposes. You are, yeah? So what you're hearing a description of can be your present mental state right now. It's not like something that was caught in the Aboriginal territories and we're dissecting it on a sterile little Zoom plate. No, it's what's happening now. The head has a case. That case is drawn out in time, and basically everything that you have found yourself relying on has an underlying agenda to support that. Yeah? So you're never going to get the real skinny from the mental condition. It's not, because it has an agenda. Yeah? So, but all the while that activity is going on, there's awareness. No beginning, no end. And if we're not of it, we're pretty damn close to it. So, I would say it's the unsuspecting resource. We're not aware. There's awareness, yeah? We're not aware. We, as this long-lasting, independent, separate entity, is not aware, yeah? We are awareness. It's different, quite different. Yeah, as we're appearing, we're not aware, and yet all appearances are of awareness. Yes, but how we are appearing is not aware. Yet all appearances are of awareness. Yeah. So I hope that's not helpful, and yeah. The more confused you are, the better, really, because hey, if your system greets it and understands all the ingredients, you got the wrong pizza, really. Yeah, yeah. You might as well be upset about the delivery, and that hopefully, yeah. Yeah. And remember, our approach isn't to talk to you. I mean, I'm tired of all that. It's to talk through you and just get to what you are. Yeah. And I have great faith that the spiritual subpoena is served, not because of Paul, but because of that which is wanting to serve the spiritual subpoena. Yeah. And I've watched it for years do its job. And its job is not really, to take long breaths and let's let things land. No, don't. Just get overwhelmed by trying to understand this. And then when you realize the impossibility of understanding it, that's the understanding, really. That's what we're shooting for. So, all right. It's nice to see everybody, and let's release the Krakens. Yeah, let's go.
Ani?
Hi, Paul. I've heard you say this more than once that you're not talking to me. You're talking through me.
Yes.
And I beg your pardon, but I'm trying to hang with you on that one, because if you're not talking to me, you're talking through me, and you're talking to consciousness, to awareness. But really, what you're not trying to tell consciousness or awareness anything. You're not trying to teach consciousness or awareness anything. So it sounds like you're talking to me and not to consciousness or awareness.
No. Who says you're not going to get a message to consciousness? Who says that?
I don't know. Maybe I have a false hierarchy here. Maybe a false assumption about a hierarchy that consciousness or awareness wouldn't need you or me or anybody talking to it, because consciousness and awareness would know more than I would, or
Well,
you.
of course it would, but what's playing this role right now is consciousness and awareness, yes? If all there is awareness, then awareness is appearing and taking itself, seemingly, to be this action figure, yes?
Okay.
So look, it's like this. Let's say there's that old story about the young lion, and then it runs into an older lion, and the older lion drags it over because this young lion lost its mother and has taken itself to be a sheep for quite a while. It's still the lion, it always is the lion, but it's taking itself to be the sheep, yes? So then the old lion drags it over to the watering hole and puts both their heads over, and the young lion gets a message. It sees the old lion and sees I look just like the old lion and gets it. It gets it. It's a lion. Not as a sheep, just immediate lion. Yeah? Now
Yes.
what happens is it walks away, the old lion takes off sooner or later, it walks away from the water hole, and what kicks in? The mental condition kicks in, and now the lion is looking through the lens of a sheep and takes itself to be the sheep. And now the sheep explains the revelation of lionness as an experience the sheep had. Who's playing all those roles?
Lion.
Yes. So we're talking to the lion about the sheep. Yeah. I'm not talking to awareness about awareness. I'm talking to awareness about this other event. Let's say the action figure. Yeah. So that the awareness hits and realizes something it has never forgotten, just like in the Course in Miracles, it talks about this idea of separation was an insane idea. Where? In the mind of God. Where? In the mind of God. And then God immediately corrected it, and it's as if it never happened, yeah? And that there's a little dreaming, this time loop that continues on, and there's still an engagement in there. So in a sense, this is what's going on. So yes, we are talking to the Buddha. Yeah, we are. Yeah, about Jill or about Bonnie. Yeah, so that the Buddha recollects, hey, I'm not Jill and Bonnie. So why the hell, as AKA Jill and Bonnie, am I looking for the Buddha? Yeah, so it's actually true. Yeah. You see, we have to go through the mail slot of the action figure in a way. Yes? To get to the Buddha. Yeah. And then the Buddha is informed that it's not the Buddha. Has it known that it's not the Buddha? Oh, for sure. But has it seemingly been forgetting? Yes, it seems like that's the case. Bang, and now it sees that which it ain't as that which it ain't. Yes? So the correction that was never needed has been made. Yeah. That's how we're speaking about it. Yes.
So you're telling me that you're telling awareness, or you're telling the Buddha, or you're telling consciousness. Hey, you had a little glitch here, and what?
Because there's an act of dreaming. What do you believe is dreaming?
I don't know.
Well, if all there is awareness, then I would imagine it seems like it's awareness, yes? If you want to follow that line.
All right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So, all right. So there's an action of awareness, dreaming. And what's it doing in a sense? It's dreaming to forget itself in a way, as an experience, so to speak. Yeah?
Okay.
By remembering itself as a dreamt, as a thing. All the while being awareness, yes or no?
Okay.
Yes. So we're not that which awareness is coming through. That's the action figure. We are the awareness. Now, there's a belief in awareness that awareness knows everything. Yes, but also awareness can seemingly forget. Obviously, yeah?
Did not. That's a new
You wake up
concept to me.
What do you wake up to? Is it you that wakes up to awareness, or is it awareness?
From this perspective, it would definitely be awareness.
So therefore, there's no you to wake up.
I hear you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes. So in a dreaming, anything can happen. Anything can happen in dreaming. Yeah. So the impossibility of awareness forgetting itself can seem to be a possibility in dreaming. Yeah? Yeah. Is it a reality? Of course not. In reality, there'd be no forgetting of reality. But in dreaming, there sure seems like there's a forgetting, yes?
Oh, Barbara has her hand up.
I was looking for an answer, but that's all right. Yeah.
Hi, Paul.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your message that not you, but AKA, not you, but
Yeah.
thank you for the message.
Yeah.
I have two things that I kind of want to ask, and I'm not good at this, so please be patient. Years ago when I got cleaned up and did my life and whatever, 1,000 years ago, many life stories ago. Anyways, one thing that stuck with me when I came through that somehow, like it was pulling me out. And it was this statement that when one organizes around truth, the message truth, it becomes a lie. And I sat with that for many years. And to this day, through just being aware that actually comes more true every day. And I'm wondering, is that the negating in the
That's
trueness?
the fundamental thing. It's sort of like the statement of there's a great party, but every time you get there, it sucks. So yes, exactly.
Yeah,
It's
so
another way of saying the same thing.
yeah, because the interest around the organizing, I've lost any interest in. It doesn't interest me at all.
Well, that's awesome. Yes.
But the
Yeah.
other thing was that I was listening to you last week, and it brought a story to mind when you were talking about just the awareness that it's in all things. And so my question was, I don't know if I'm getting this right. So this gentleman is walking along a road and he sees an elephant and he sees a rider on the elephant. And he says to himself, well, awareness is all things. It won't ever, run me over or anything. I'm safe in awareness. So anyways, all of a sudden the elephant starts thundering out and running towards him, and he gets stomped and killed. And then he shows up in awareness, I guess. And he says, well, where were you? Like you said that, like, this is all just dreaming. And he said, well, yeah, but I was on top of the elephant yelling at you to get out of the way.
Yes.
That's kind
Yes.
of the story of my life. Just get out of the way. And so I was wondering if like you share a lot of the Zen stories, which I'm very grateful for, especially the little bird in the hand, the push off.
Yeah.
I thank you for that one. And that the day isn't bigger than me. I love that. Thank you for giving me that. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Remember one thing, awareness isn't in things. Things are appearing in awareness, yeah. A thing isn't aware, yeah. So, see, the dreaming, who do you believe is doing the dreaming? Unless it's the dreaming. And who do we see as Bill and Paul and Jimmy and Mary? It's the dreamt, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Do we ever see the dreaming?
No.
Yes, all day. Is there a dreamer? No. Yeah. How do we look in the dreaming? Well, we look from a dreamt, yeah. Is that the same as the awareness, the seeing? Yes. Yeah. Why isn't that awareness serving me? Because that awareness, there's been an act of identification, and then the seeing now is a form of looking, yeah? So you're blind to the seeing by looking for it, because it's the seeing that's looking for the seeing, yeah? Yeah, same thing. If you organize around truth, that's not it, exactly. Because there's no one to organize around truth. The truth is there is no one.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have a big organization.
That's a good thing.
So, yeah. You and I are the dreaming of the dream. I think the Course in Miracles says that. Yeah. This is one of my favorite statements of the Course. I hope I probably changed it dramatically over the years, but it says, you and I are the dreaming of the dream. We forget that we're dreaming. How does that happen? Well, I believe it's the act of being identified as the dreamt, yeah? So we forget that we're the dreaming, and then what happens? And that when there's a forgetting that I'm the dreaming, I now give everything I'm dreaming the power to affect me, yeah? As the dreamt, yes? But all of that is the dreaming, yes? All of it, yeah? Yeah. And you would think awareness and consciousness is all knowing. Well, in the appearance of the dreaming, that may not be the case. Yeah, because we seem to be pretty damn awake. I mean, asleep. And we are what we're looking for, being ourselves reality. So I beg to differ with the present evidence. Yeah, so. It's only awareness that can believe it's unaware. Yeah, that's the craziness. Whoever came up with the fact that, oh, we are a consciousness, and yet then most of us think we're unconscious. Most of the time, or we're trying to become more conscious. Yeah. What's ultimately doing that? Yeah, it's a glove of thingness and action figureness, but what's animating that glove is the awareness, obviously. There's nothing else there. So I don't know I think there's awareness in action can have a certain Joker mentality there. And we end up being the butt of the big universal joke. everything being all there is awareness doesn't mean everything looks like what we think awareness would look like. It's not, that doesn't, that would be a lousy dream. That would be a lousy dreaming. If there was big holes everywhere you looked. Yeah, so that's why I feel we're not speaking to you. We're speaking through you. Yeah. Telling you it's not you doesn't go anywhere, I swear. It just gets the person more freaking twisted and more mentally screwed than ever. Yeah. When what you're not proclaims I'm not that doesn't go anywhere. It's when what you are sees what you're not, that goes somewhere. Yes? Yeah. So the whole point of doing the talks was never to illuminate Barbara or Paul or Alex. It was in a sly way tickling what's already and always illuminated. Yes? Yeah. Yeah.
Paul, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I noticed you said awareness is the one believing all this. And I recently had
I'm not
a
saying no. It's not awareness believing all this.
Oh,
It's
because
the
I was
mental
wanted to
state
share an
believing all
insight.
this. But basically, what's allowing everything to occur, obviously, is awareness. Yes, that's the field everything is appearing in. And does anything that appear have its own reality?
I wanted to share the insight I recently had and just bounce it off of you for a second.
All right.
It was, I've been doing the work with Byron Katie for a while and undoing thoughts and seeing which thoughts are torturing me and, causing me to suffer. But then I realized it's the believer. And then I was like, well, who is the believer? And what came to me is that's just another mechanism of mind. It's mind making up the stories and then mind believing its own garbage, its own stories.
Yeah.
And then the body has a reaction in real time to whatever the believer believes is real. And so what I noticed from that it was the mind that's doing it. But here's where, when you said the thing about the awareness, believing, it was like, I think what makes sense is awareness is using the mind, or could possibly, because I feel like mind can be a tool that's used either in a helpful way or not so helpful way. And then awareness is what we are, and mind is that what we are not. So when I realize that if believer is the mind, that means I'm not a believer. And there was this feeling of utter relief and just a release and feeling so much lighter. And so I just wanted to bounce that off of you.
Well, there isn't really what you're not and what you are. Yeah.
So you're saying there's no mind, even though mind activity is happening.
Well, I say there's mental activity. My idea of mind is more of awareness, a big M. But what I'm saying is the sense of what you are and what you're not are two sides of the same coin. Yes? The sense of what you are as it's held here, the sense of it. In other words, the action figure's reaction to what we are is a sense of what we are, is a companion piece with the sense of what you're not. So it's a negation, basically. There's a negation of what you're not, and then there's no need for what you are, because you are that. Yes? Yeah? Yeah.
Like you don't need it if you already have it, right?
Well, the point is, we're taking a little route in a way. There's a negation there's a negation of one aspect of it, but what goes along with that is the other aspect of it. So it isn't like there is no two, there's one. No, there's no one in the two and zero. Yeah. Yeah, you see? It's getting out there today, but I like it, so I hope you guys do. So obviously, when we're here speaking about what we are, it's a comparison with what we're not, yes? So basically, it's just saying what we are has nothing to do with what we're not to get a message through, yeah? A way of communicating, yeah? Sort of like, okay, what you're not is the thorn, and what you are and what you're not is bothering you. So we're going to sit down and we're going to look around and we're going to find another thorn called what you are, and we're going to dig out the what you're not thorn, but we're not going to replace it with the what you are thorn. We're throwing that out also. Yeah? So basically, the package that you are has no title on it, no address on it, no name on it. Yes? Yeah. So the only interest I have in what I am is the way it can be used to negate what you're not. Yeah, yeah. And then both of them, there's a loss of interest in both of them, and you just find yourself being whatever. Yeah. I'm not walking around telling myself I'm being what I am all day. And I'm not being what I'm not. I don't do anything like that. Yeah. Things are just settled, and there's no need to have okay, I'm going to be clear about one by pointing out the other. Yeah. Throw it out. Yeah. Now I hope this is becoming cryptic enough that you'll come back in 3 weeks when we come back.
Barbara has her hand up again.
All right, Barbara.
If I get the wording wrong, forgive me for that. But
It's fine.
so let me understand that. The body wakes up. The dreamer, the dreaming wakes up, the body. The world can't wake up and be there till the body's there, right? Because it is within the dreaming that the world becomes. I don't know if I got this right, but awareness is always there to meet me as I wake up because I'm in it. I am it.
Well, there's no you that's going to wake up to it. See,
right.
The awareness is all there is, and then there's a lot of appearances going. Yeah. Dreaming means everything in the dreaming is a dreamlike quality. In other words, it's not real. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah. There's not one bit of the of that which is appearing in the dreaming as real. Yeah. Yeah.
So the world is just wakes up after the body wakes up because the body is the dreaming. It is the dreaming. And so the world is the dream. Is that right? Or what?
No, there isn't the world, first of all. And the world's not waking up.
Well, just the appearances within the day. Like, I don't know what you're going to call it.
Aren't going to wake up. There's awakening up that you're not an appearance, basically.
Okay.
But the appearance doesn't wake up. No.
Okay.
There's a recognition that you're not the appearances, and what you find, you've always been that, which you are hoping to wake up to. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And so basically, it says not in an adversarial way. It says it's always been this way. So it basically negates every morsel of reality we gave appearances. It just says it's always been this way, which is what? A lack of appearance. And that lack of appearance isn't appearing. Yeah. It's all the appearing, but if there's not called the lack of appearing, the lack of appearance isn't appearing here. It's contextual, yeah? And then we're in the soup, seemingly, content. And we're trying to see how the content is the context. But the best way is to see from the context and see a not content. Instead of trying to see from the content how much you are of the context, yeah? It's just that easy. Yeah.
Thank you.
And what I'm saying is most investigation that issue from us are issuing from the content. Yeah. And they're trying to figure out the context, all the while being of the context. So we're basically saying, yeah, you could say knock it off, but that doesn't work. But maybe if you realize you're not that which is seemingly doing all this stuff, there'll be a loss of interest in all the doing of this stuff. And that which is will become more obvious, let's say. Yeah? Yeah. In other words, let's say here you are, and where I'm looking out of, there's like 12 different trees. Yeah? One moment, maybe all the emphasis will be on the space that they're appearing in. Yeah? Yeah. Does that limit the appearance of the trees? No. It brings more of a panoramic, a larger view available. Yeah? So it's not like, we used to have a story about an incredibly advanced camera, yeah? It had a mobile tripod, and it was trucking around, and it sees one of those old cardboard cameras you used to buy at a pharmacy that only had like 12 shots in it, and then you'd bring it back to the pharmacy and they'd print the picture, and it was like $8 or something, and it had like a plastic lens, and you just pointed and hoped, you couldn't really even see through the lens, and then you get the pictures. So here's this incredible camera, and it's walking around, and it sees this little cardboard camera and starts looking through it. And as it's looking through it, it forgets that it's the big camera, seemingly. It's appearing to forget. It's not, nothing happened really, yes, but it appeared that it forgot, and now it takes itself to be this little cardboard camera. And now it's feeling a sort of weirdness when all these pictures get developed. They're fucking terrible, grainy. Most of the people aren't even centered, and it has this vague sense that it was panoramic, surround sound, everything before, yeah? But it can't seem to get out of the frame of the cardboard camera because it's identified as the camera. So the best thing it can do is it buys like a $5,000 Nikon lens and puts it on the plastic lens with the hopes it's going to improve the quality of your life, whatever, of the pictures. But because the plastic lens is in the primary position, it doesn't matter how good the lens you put on it is. The picture's gonna be of the plastic, yeah, or from the plastic. So it's pointless to keep trying to improve, got bigger Nikon lenses, because the plastic lens is thwarting all of your improvements, so to speak, yes? So what happens? The idea filters in, some other camera comes by, bumps into the big camera, and says, oh, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't disturb you looking through the cardboard camera. And then the big camera goes, what? I'm looking through the cardboard, and now suddenly a possibility that wasn't available to it becomes available. I'm not the cardboard camera. Hallelujah. So it can back off. And now it doesn't have such a huge judgment on the graininess of the pictures. It accepts the situation as the cardboard camera, not from the cardboard camera, but from its largeness, yes? This is the whole point of the talks, in a way. One of the many points. Yeah? So, are you the large camera? No. It's an example. Yeah? Because of there's two-ness, we've got to look at one of the two, see that you're not that, And then in the seeing of you're not that, there's a negation of the being the seer of that. And there you go. So you get from 2 to 0. You don't go from 2 to 1. You go from see the 1 in the 2 and then 0. Yeah. Yeah. You don't go anywhere. It's just an image. Yes. Yeah. Now that's the last answer because yes. You see the slavery of the mental activity, but you're not the slave of it. Yes? Because part of the slavery is the sense of being the slave of it. Yeah? That's actually the largest part of it. So, yeah.
Kathy has her hand up.
We'd have to have a retreat to go through this clearly. Somehow or another, we climbed up to the high branches of the tree. Yeah. But hey, we're here. So, yes.
Jacqueline, did you want to say something? Just say it.
Yeah, I think a retreat is a great idea. Let's talk about that, Paul, at some point.
Yeah. All right. Any question or?
Yeah, hi, Paul. It's Kathy on the phone. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Sana. I just have to. Well, you know, this is the conundrum. From what I'm getting out of this is that basically what we are not is trying to understand that we're not what we think we are.
Yeah.
What we are not trying to do, the understanding of what it is we are not.
Yes.
And having said that, I just want to read this, and it is from the Course, because it just says to me the same thing you just have been telling us. This is from, what is it, text 18. You are still convinced that your understanding is a powerful contribution to the truth and makes it what it is. Yet we have emphasized that you need understand nothing. So
yeah. That's a nice slap.
Yeah, and so having that conceptual understanding, because that's all it is, there's still this, well, who is it that still wants to understand what it is that I don't understand? So it just feels like it's all bundled up in there. And from here, I'm going to refer to something from your website from on having never left the unfinished works of Paul Hedderman, first edition. You write, self is remembered through time when you are thought about in the past. You are remembered as the body now. Thoughts of the future are being used to remember you as a body now. The mental claiming of the thoughts, feelings, and actions are being used to reinforce the idea of being the thinker, feeler, and doer. So I'm trying to, I guess, square these up or integrate them. How can I be remembered through time and travel lighter in time and understand that there is no time, there is no world, just forget everything. Like that quote from 189 in the Course workbook, forget everything, because it's all just a process. Everything is about nothing. There is no nothing. So from a time perspective, how do I understand what you're telling us here when you write self as remembered through time? What does that look like in illusory world terms? Because I know that's where I am still. I get the concept,
so
but
when your head when if you go into memory, obviously there's no going into memory, but memory, you're pictured as a body, yes? When you look back at a memory from 4 years ago about going to Hawaii, how are you pictured? I think I lost her.
Yeah, sorry, no, I just muted myself while you were talking, and sometimes I've tried.
Well, how did you're pictured as a body, yes?
Yeah, I would see a mental image, dreamlike in appearance based on a past recollection.
Yes.
Which is what I'm not.
Exactly. So that's a form of remembering you're a body now, yes? You're not remembering you were a body. You're remembering you're a body now by having an idea of a past event, yes?
So I'm as thinking I'm a body now, I'm remembering myself as a body in the past.
No, yeah, you're remembering, but you're remembering as a body now. You're using the past. You're not. The head is using the past to remember itself now.
Okay. And reaffirming the self I'm not as a body. Just
why do you think why it's one of the main uses of time in the mental activity? See, it's idea of so there's the I am, remember that famous book I Am That. So how the mental state arrives at I am Paul is I was Paul, I will be Paul, therefore I am Paul. Yeah. It doesn't start with I am Paul. It doesn't, because there's nothing to start. There's no real material from here. It goes to a past idea and a future idea to imply that idea is now. Yes?
How does it go to a future idea?
Hmm?
You think goes from a past idea?
Let's say you're sitting here and the head is worrying. It's not you. The head is worrying about your physical or emotional or mental or financial, which has to do with a physical condition, in the future. That's a form of remembering Paul now. Yeah?
Based on a false past recollection.
Based on the recollection of either vague or clear cut by having photos that you're a body, you're the doer, you're the thinker. So the assumption now uses yesterday and tomorrow. Yeah. The assumption now wouldn't stand on any feet. It doesn't have any. So it implies you were there and you will be there, therefore you are here now. Yeah. It's a main part of the trick is time. The mental state uses time. So what's happening? And then there's an awareness of what's happening. Okay? Or you want to call it conscious contact. Seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching. Something occurs in time, something arises and claims the seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and touching, to claim that there's a seer, a hearer, a feeler, a taster, a toucher. Now that wouldn't probably hold much weight, so it pictures that as a body. And so when you remember yourself as a body, you remember yourself as the seer, hearer, feeler, taster, doer, thinker, or stuff like that. So it's constantly reinforcing this assumption that you're a thing, yeah, that you're an object that's the subject. And it's just, it's like in the Course it says on, I think, 456 that, firm in faith in this something else that you made to be yourself, and in the active denial of what you are. That's what it is. So how firm in faith that when you think of Hawaii 4 years ago, that's you. That body on the beach, that's you. Yeah, yeah. So it has to constantly keep reinforcing this fact because it's not a fact. That's the whole point. Yeah. So we call it selfing. It's a big production. Yeah, it's constantly assuming a before that was never before. You're not the doer of all the deeds. You're not the one who attends all the events. The events do happen and deeds are done, but there's no individual doer thereof. Yeah, as Buddha said, supposedly. Yeah. Yeah. So time,
that
through
I'm
time,
not in time. I wasn't born and then I grew up and went through things and then, or thought I went through things, and then here I am, I'm getting older now, and then I see myself getting even older than that, the old, heading that way. Okay, so if I just lose the whole timepiece, then the only thing that there can be is the now, the holy instant, right? The now. There is no
that's
past.
the only that has been still. It's not that it's going to be, it's the only instant there is. Yeah.
But going to be just from the claimed body self perspective that is
Well,
using
the self perspective is, the self perspective is like getting to that holy instant or the party that you heard so many great things about, and then it sucks because
because there's still a doer trying to do the holy instant scene. Like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do that.
Really? Well, knock it off, honey. The holy instant doesn't need you to make it holy.
And it doesn't need my understanding. In fact, nothing exists anyway.
Yeah, a good understanding that you misunderstand it pretty much all the time that's worthy. That's valuable. Yes.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the value is because there's a lot of subtle and crude reliances on this idea of self all day. It's not us. It's obviously the mental condition relying on what it's making up to be us. Yeah. But we get confused. We recognize one side of the coin of the mental condition, but we take ourselves to be the real side, which is just another mental condition. So that's why it's not like what we're not and what we are. We're using a little mechanism of communication to trigger something, because I remember very clearly when I was younger doing workshops, a guy I used to know I met in India from Australia got in touch with me, and he was involved in the Course in Miracles with a group in Wisconsin, and he wanted me to set up a seminar, and him and this lady were going to come and do a talk for 2 days, and I did. And the first, all these people that knew me from this other stuff showed up, and other people, and they started off with "there is no world," and everyone fucking pretty much left by lunch. Yeah. And a lot of the people I never saw again. So I realized you don't arrive at the possibility of the absolute by saying the absolute. You arrive at where you already are by negating. So let's take the one thorn out, and let's not idealize the second thorn. Throw that one too. It's useful because of the first thorn. When the first thorn's out, you don't replace the first thorn with the second thorn. You throw both of them away. Exactly. Yeah. So we're not here saying there is no thorn. That's part of the thorn. That's a denial. No, we're just recognizing, hey, something's off. Let's and then you'll see your huge role in it, and then hopefully you'll see, hey, that one who had the huge role isn't me at all. Hallelujah. Yeah, there'll be a loss of interest in it, and they'll be gaining interest. Why would I want to ruin the revelations of your life by trying to describe what that will be? You'll find out. Yeah. 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 So, thanks.
Thank you. If I could just say the whole thing consistently through a lot of the universal teachings, it's an undoing. It's just, that's why we need do nothing. There's nothing to be done. There's no doer. It's just negating or undoing what isn't there in the first place. And that's what I mean by nothing. There's nothing there. And that nothing I put in as an obstacle to recognizing that I'm not what I believe myself to be. undoing. That's what forgiveness has said. Forgiveness just simply, it's a process of undoing. Salvation is a process of undoing. It just doesn't support the false illusion. And that's it. That's the sum total.
Let's say you're undoing a clasp. Basically, that's all your job. It will fall off, right? Once that which is attaching it to something is loosened, there's no job. You don't pull it off. It falls off. Yeah. So there's no one that's doing undoing. And it's not an infinite chore. It just happens to a point, and then there's a huge loss of interest in it. Because like Ramana would describe, from what I read, he would talk about self-inquiry. And so you use what you're not to negate what you're not, in a way. And he'd say, when there's that sense of being home, don't inquire who's home, enjoy it. And then if the head seems to leave, then ask who is that left, because it isn't you. Yeah. But you're sort of leaning into the feeling of have left. So you ask, well, who is it that left? It's not you. So then that fallacy that you left is dismissed, and then you keep falling back to where you never left. And then there's a point where you've never left. There's no need to fall back anymore or whatever. You've never left. Yeah. I mean,
thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, there's not extreme levels of futility. You realize the futility of what there was a reliance on, and the whole story of who or what's relying on it. And there's I mean, how much futility do you need to be shown? I don't know. Hopefully not much. And then there's a rude assessment, a rude awakening, and a sober assessment. Hey, yeah. And then without you knowing it, because you still seem to be playing, the cards get pulled back and they get reshuffled, and interest and attention goes to different places and different things and different no things. And you find you're the better for it. Yeah. You travel lighter. And that's really, what more did I ever really want? Confronted with all of these obstacles here was really an ability that I couldn't seem to conjure up, but I can express, which is traveling lighter. Yeah, hallelujah. So, anyone else? Or we've crossed the time mark of 5:30. Let's go on forward, if you like. Oh, no, any more questions? Anyone?
Yeah, I got one.
Oh, you have one. All right.
Right.
Dale,
Oh, hey, how's it going?
you finished knitting, Dale, or what?
Yeah, I dropped a stitch, but it's okay. It's all good. Okay. When you talk about the hearing or the hearer, I do that is kind of lost on me. Like I wrote down here, I wrote on this page, am I the hearing or am I the hearer or am I here?
Yeah, in this case, let's just say you're the hearing.
I'm the hearing. Okay.
Yeah, but in this case, we're not gonna, yeah.
That's good enough. That's fine.
Yeah, let's start there and
Keep
then
it.
see where it takes you. Yeah.
Thank you.
But see, you're not the hearing as the hearer. See, that's the trick. Yeah.
Oh,
You're the hearing of the hearing. You're not the hearing as the hearer. Yeah. As the
Oh.
object. Yes. Be clear about that.
okay. So I'm the hearing of the hearing.
You're the hearing of the hearing. Yes. Let's put it that. You're not the hearer. Yeah. That's the.
Okay. Thank you. I will keep this in mind until I see you down the road.
Great, Dale. Anytime. Anytime. Yeah.
Travel nicely on your trip.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, it's not really we're the hearing of the hearing. We're the hearing, period. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Which is
We are
correct.
the hearing
Yeah, yeah. We're not
In
the
this-
hearing of the hearing. No.
in this case.
In this case, yeah.
Okay.
But it can be applied to seeing, feeling, tasting, touching, smelling. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, all these words. Like they're words I know, but I don't really know them in this way.
Yeah. Well, I love to screw things up, so it's great.
That's good. You keep us on our toes.
Yeah. Someone has to.
No kidding. That's for sure.
Yeah. What's hearing isn't pictured as hearing. Yeah. You got me going now. What's hearing isn't a form of hearing. Yeah. It's an awareness, yeah, of an activity. That's what's hearing.
I think you need to write in invisible ink.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this isn't the point. The point is hopefully a feeling or some kind of sense that gets through. But yeah. Yeah. This you must be feeling something in the Zoom, yes? In the Zooms. Yeah. That's the real point. That's we're all somewhere quite intimate with that sense or that feeling. Yeah. It's before every breath. It's before. Yeah. I remember I remember this time in early recovery, these two people were sharing at a meeting, and they both seemed like they were lit up, yeah? That attracted me. And then they told me about something called these old dudes, Joe and Charlie, used to put out this Big Book seminar. Big Book is the text of recovery. And then the next months followed. I didn't hear anything about this seminar. And one night I heard it, and I ran up there and I got the application, and I signed up and I went. My girlfriend was going to go with me. She canceled, so I went there. I didn't know anyone. It was like 600 people there. But following that light in those people sure had a wonderful effect, yeah? So something was transmitted, while not what they were saying, but yeah, what was saying it. And yeah, hopefully that's the spiritual subpoena, yeah. It's an energetic imprint, basically. Yeah. a lot of people here know me. They've had it already, Kerry and others. So, yeah. Not they had it, but yeah. Yeah. Anyone else?
Paul,
Yes.
David. David has his hand up.
Oh, David. Yes.
Let's see. Hey, Paul. Hi again.
Hospital visits since this morning.
No, not since this
Oh,
morning.
great.
Have been good. Yeah, things have been good. Thank you.
Something's working. Great.
Absolutely. I just wanted to ask, earlier this evening, you were talking about, Ramana spending time in silence and sort of realizing more was needed and started speaking of self-inquiry. And you kind of had sort of said, I'm actually encouraging people to fully engage in this process of inquiry in order to realize the futility of it. I think you said something like that a little bit earlier tonight. I mean, I'm asking because you're, but there's no prescription to that inquiry, right? I mean, it's following the pursuit of truth itself, even though that might take the form of a twisted pretzel at times from the perspective of what you're not. Is that correct?
Well, to me, self-inquiry is really a negation, because that which is asking, and that which is being asked, both are not you. So it's a negation, really. So, and when those activities, their primacy is extracted, you sense the being space, yeah? Yeah, and then if the head gets busy and you believe you follow the head, then ask again. Well, basically it was more from whence do I come? Because his belief, obviously, everything is coming from everything, yeah? So if you follow any activity that has found a movement in time, in this dreaming, you'll always be brought back to where you never left. So he basically used self-inquiry to sort of, before you get miles and miles of imaginary distance, you could ask it once it's starting to rev up. You guys, well, who is it? So like say there's worrying about next week. Yeah, and then you go, before you get involved in next week, you go, well, who is it that's worrying about next week? And you ask, yeah? And then when it says it's me, you ask, well, who's this me? And usually there's a pause, and there you are, really. You're that space, yes? So it's like Ramana definitely from, I'm not an expert. I'm just an admirer. I didn't read everything and all like that, but he would warn, don't make it a formal thing or a ritual or a discipline, just ask. And then when you're resting, enjoy the rest, yeah? Why bring in the confusion when there's an absence of it? Just rest, yeah? So, yeah. So I don't really prescribe anything. I figure you all have been frequent visitors of the spiritual pharmacy already. I just like to question, because I believe a lot of meaning is given to things through the mind, yeah, through this vague sense of owning shit we have nothing to do with, yeah? And so I just want to keep pounding that point of that which is presenting itself as you isn't you, yeah? That which is talked about as you isn't you. That which is talking about you isn't you, yeah? Yeah, so just, and I've never did that much self-inquiry, tell you the truth. Yeah, I haven't done much of anything, really. Yeah, I did a lot in drug addiction, basically. I found basically the futility of trying to get out of an imaginary place there, and it became applicable to a lot of other pursuits, like spirituality. So once things started getting clearer and we put out a website and people from outside recovery got in touch with me, I got firsthand witnessing of spiritual addiction. I'd be, and I could point it out. And the person that was right in the midst of it still thought that they were separate and they were talking about something that wasn't going on right now. Which is the addictive nature of spiritual addiction. So I'd be at a place where they'd be there for 7 days, 60 people. They'd bring in these out like gunslingers from outside for the weekend, and they used to bring me from California to North Carolina, and then I would be speaking about spiritual addiction, so to speak, and one of the people would say, "Can you give me an example?" And I'd go, "Voila, right, this right here. You're the living example. You don't need an example. You got to see that you are the example, and then you're not the example. Yeah." First own it, and then you're not it. But don't try to not be it. Yeah, it doesn't work. There's no leaping into nothingness from somethingness. There's got to be a negation of the something, yeah, and then a finding out of the nothing. Something doesn't leap into nothing. It's just that's more something. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
This is how we attempt to present it. There is a logic to it all, even though you're wondering right now. There is, and there's a seamlessness up to it. Yeah.
But the specific form of that inquiry can sort of be applied, or not even applied, but appear to be applied when you catch yourself in that moment of seeing something and not happening. Yeah.
Yes, that's good. It works. It's just, tools are great for a certain point, but you'd like to outgrow tools. Yes, you would like tools. I think the optimum value of a tool is to lead to not being needed. I feel. Yeah, don't you? Yeah. Yeah. I'm all right with tools, but I don't think I want to, carry them the rest of my life. I just want, something becomes clear, and it doesn't get unclear. So there's no need to polish the mirror, so to speak. All you see is your big head polishing the mirror. The mirror is clear. It's empty, and now it's reflecting you, trying to polish the mirror. Yeah, the mirror doesn't need any polishing. Your mirror does. But thank God it's not your mirror. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Dave. Thank you for putting up with us. Yeah.
Have safe travels now. Love you guys. Thanks.
Yeah, we're not gone yet. I'll be there tomorrow night, but then Thursday we leave. Yeah. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. It's planned that we'll be leaving. Oh, there's John K. Nice to see John K. here, too. Anyone else? No? We'll have to say, yeah, whatever. Where's the leader of the whole thing? She left already. We've gone rogue. Oh, here she is. There you are. You gotta reel me in, baby. Come on.
I'm just, what is it? Resting in the rest.
Oh, good.
This has been beautiful. I just feel so settled into that aware space. I'm grateful.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, we better end it then. It can only go downhill from there. So, yeah. Stoking the fire doesn't necessarily improve the fire. Yeah. What can be burned will burn. You don't have to fucking throw the shit in it. They'll find it. Yeah. All right, well, is that all? Yeah. I'll say goodbye to everyone if we have time. Yeah? All right, we got John K. Always a pleasure, John. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night. If not, I'll see you. We'll do something in the next 3 weeks, so just keep an eye on the website occasionally. We got Jacqueline. Thank you, Jacqueline, for all the holding the space and support. And yes, Saina, it's Saina. I know that. Nice, honey. I almost fell back into the old habit. Oh, Glenda, nice to see you, Glenda. Yeah? Glenda, like everyone here, knowing it or not, you're a lifetime member of ZenBitchSlap.com. Not .com, ZenBitchSlap. So there are a lot of benefits. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. All right, we got AT Radio Computer. Let's move on from there. Lindsay, Nick, and Andy. Who else was there? We got, nice to see Connie. Nice to see you, Connie. Thanks for putting up with us again. We got Joe. Oh, Joe S. Nice to see you, Joe. Tommy from Ireland. He's found his way here. I'm very privileged to have Tommy show up. We got Dale O. That thing's going to be rather long when I see you, Dale. All right, good. We got Barbara. Barbara got the whole thing cooking tonight. Yes. David, nice to see you, B. John K. Hey, everyone else there or not there. Thank you for this opportunity. There's all information on Zen Bitch Slap. And I hope to see you the first Tuesday after September 16th. So, okay, I mean on Awakening Together. Yeah. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.